The ocean, vast and indifferent, has swallowed countless vessels, but in the cold spring of 1943, somewhere in the North Atlantic, it took something far more troubling and left nothing behind. The Allied submarine HMS Vigilant was one of the most advanced underwater craft of its kind, assigned to a seemingly routine patrol through contested waters. Crewed by seasoned officers and outfitted with cutting-edge wartime tech, it was expected to return within a week. It never did. No distress call was received. No wreckage was recovered. No oil slicks, no flotsam, no emergency pings. It was as if the vessel had simply dissolved into the deep. A steel ghost erased without a sound. Wartime losses were common, and silence was often the final word for those who sailed beneath enemy-infested waters. But there was something different about the Vigilant. Other submarines struck mines, fell to depth charges, or surfaced just long enough to cry for help. Vigilant didn't do any of that. It slipped beneath the waves and was gone. In the days following its disappearance, naval intelligence quietly rerouted nearby patrols. Reconnaissance flights were sent out without formal record, and families of the crew were told to expect delays in communication, not a loss. The implication was clear. Whatever happened to HMS Vigilant, it wasn't supposed to happen, and it wasn't supposed to be talked about. Most patrol submarines carried a modest crew and conventional gear. Vigilant was different. Behind closed doors, it had been dubbed a prototype in plain sight. An experimental platform retrofitted with classified sonar systems, encrypted communication protocols, and even rumored stealth modifications. It was one of the few subs reportedly testing frequency masking systems, early attempts to render sonar detection ineffective, and then there was the crew. While some on board were seasoned Navy men, several had no naval records at all. One passenger, listed only as Dr. E. Howard, was later linked to a British acoustic research lab involved in classified U-boat countermeasures. Another, a linguist with military clearance, had no clear reason to be aboard a war patrol. Even stranger was the submarine's destination. Officially, it was patrolling near the Greenland-Iceland Gap, hunting German U-boats, but leaked war maps suggest a divergence, a quiet redirection toward an unmarked zone roughly 90 nautical miles southwest of Jan Mayen Island. This region, long considered a navigational dead zone, had been the subject of intermittent electromagnetic interference reports, none of which were publicly acknowledged during the war. Why would a high-tech, custom-fitted submarine be redirected to such a zone, carrying a crew that included non-combat scientists? And why were none of those scientists ever mentioned in the official loss report? The mission clearly was never routine. Whatever the Vigilant was doing, it wasn't just surveillance. It was chasing or hiding from something history still refuses to name. More than 80 years have passed since HMS Vigilant disappeared, and yet the questions surrounding its final voyage remain disturbingly intact. Declassified naval logs list its departure but not its destination. Communications logs from adjacent destroyers end abruptly. The ship's maintenance records are intact, but its mission briefing is still locked behind redactions, entire pages blacked out, as if even the destination were too dangerous to name. Naval historians, typically eager to explore obscure wartime losses, speak of Vigilant in cautious tones, if at all. One researcher who attempted to publish a paper on the disappearance abruptly retracted it after citing pressure from defense liaisons. Others suggest the sub may have been involved in an unacknowledged war front, not against Germany, but against something else entirely. If it were simply a mechanical failure, Why redact routine logs? If the sub had struck a mine, why hide its course? And if this was just another tragic wartime loss, why do whispers of the Vigilant still circulate among military circles? What if this wasn't an accident at all? What if Vigilant didn't vanish, but was erased? At precisely 4:17 hours on April the 22nd, 1943, the HMS Vigilant sent its final radio transmission. It was short, unremarkable, routine. A standard position report confirming course, weather conditions, and estimated time to next check-in. No sign of distress, no indication of a mechanical fault, no reference to hostile contact, just clipped language and wartime brevity. Position confirmed, systems green, proceeding as ordered, and then silence. But that final message, seemingly ordinary, hides a riddle. Because when historians later cross-reference the timestamp with projected naval paths, something didn't add up. The coordinates implied in the transmission placed the submarine hundreds of miles southeast of its supposed location. Experts initially assumed a clerical error. After all, wartime logs were rushed. Chaotic. But the pattern deepened. The accompanying logs from HMS Falcon, a destroyer on escort duty in the same quadrant, record no visual or sonar contact with Vigilant during that window. Worse still, radar blips believed to be the Vigilant abruptly vanish 2 hours before the transmission was recorded. How can a submarine transmit from a position it's no longer in? Signals intelligence officers later revealed that the radio burst carried anomalies, a high-frequency distortion not consistent with Allied encryption standards. Some described it as flanged or echoed, like the signal had passed through something before reaching Allied receivers. The words were clear, the time was logged. But where that transmission came from, or when, may not be as straightforward as it seemed. The waters north of Iceland are treacherous, not just for the cold or the sudden squalls, but for what lies beneath. Seafloor charts from the 1940s were notoriously incomplete, often stitched together from scattered trawler logs and rushed wartime surveys. So when HMS Vigilant vanished without a trace, some began to wonder whether it had descended into something that shouldn't have been there. One theory, whispered among naval intelligence officers years after the war, suggests that Vigilant may have encountered an uncharted trench, a deep scar in the ocean floor, never marked on any Allied map. The idea isn't entirely fantastical. In 1991, decades after the war, oceanographers mapping that region for geological study identified a steep drop-off over 2,000 meters deep, hidden beneath a false plateau. It had simply never been detected by mid-20th century sonar. Could Vigilant have been drawn toward it, lured by false readings, or perhaps something else? But there's another piece of the puzzle, and it's far stranger. A destroyer, HMS Alecto, patrolling roughly 70 nautical miles south, reported picking up a shadow on sonar, a massive, fast-moving object just beneath the thermocline. The blip appeared for mere seconds, moving against the current, then vanished. The crew believed it was a malfunction, but when news of Vigilant's disappearance surfaced days later, one sonar technician filed an informal report. It wasn't a glitch. It was something down there. Something big. Was the Vigilant pulled toward a hidden depth? Or was something already waiting for it when the Royal Navy declassified parts of its wartime operations in the 1970s? Researchers expected to finally piece together the true fate of HMS Vigilant. Instead, they found something far more troubling: two separate timelines for the submarine's final patrol. In one version, the sub departed from Scapa Flow and moved on a direct northeast route consistent with a standard U-boat interception patrol. But in another set of records, quietly attached to the intelligence division, the Vigilant was rerouted 2 days before its disappearance, sent west of Jan Mayen, near a zone never officially acknowledged during the war. Why would official logs report one path, while intelligence documents suggest another? Was it simple wartime confusion or deliberate misdirection? Some believe the route was falsified to cover up a covert reconnaissance mission. Others suspect it was trying to intercept a vessel that never appeared on Allied rosters, perhaps a rogue German craft, or something far less conventional. One theory even suggests that Vigilant was hunting a signal, a strange sonar ping that had been recorded intermittently for weeks before it vanished. What was this vessel really trying to avoid or intercept? Whatever the answer, one thing is certain: someone, somewhere, went to great lengths to bury the truth. In the final days before HMS Vigilant's departure, a sudden change came down the chain of command, the kind of change that left no paper trail, only whispers. Originally assigned to patrol the Greenland-Iceland Gap, the sub was redirected at the last moment to a lesser-known stretch of the North Atlantic, hundreds of miles off course. This new area was marked differently in internal naval maps, in tiny red lettering, barely noticeable to the untrained eye, were the words Zone 7B, restricted access. Some early drafts even labeled it no-go. The designation wasn't standard. It wasn't used in civilian charts, and it didn't correspond to any known minefields, enemy operations, or weather anomalies. What then was the risk? Some post-war analysts have speculated that Zone 7B overlapped with areas of unusual underwater acoustic activity. Naval records from 1941 mention instrument disruption and navigation interference in that same region. But those files, too, are full of omissions and redactions. The real reason for the sub's redirection remains unknown. Was it an emergency mission, a test deployment, or something darker, an attempt to investigate or perhaps contain something the military didn't fully understand? To this day, no other Allied vessel is confirmed to have re-entered that precise zone. Vigilant may have been the first and the last. Official mission briefings suggest HMS Vigilant was headed for a routine North Atlantic patrol. But the families of its crew, wives, siblings, parents, recall hearing something very different. In the hours before departure, several crew members made last-minute phone calls home. One described being sent farther north than expected. Another cryptically said they were headed to a place we're not supposed to talk about. One wife later recalled her husband sounding nervous, not the usual kind of pre-mission jitters, but something more unsettled, as if he'd been told something he didn't fully believe. There were also inconsistencies in timing. Some families received telegrams that said Vigilant had left port 2 days earlier than the official logs claimed. One sailor's brother, stationed in Scotland, swore he saw Vigilant leave harbor at dawn, while military records list the departure hours later. Such discrepancies might seem minor, but taken together, they paint a confusing picture. Were the crew told the truth about their mission? Were they even fully briefed? Or did only a select few on board, perhaps the intelligence officers or embedded scientists, truly understand what Vigilant was being sent to find? It raises the question no one in the Admiralty ever answered. Why the lies? And why are the people who still ask met with silence? In the weeks following Vigilant's disappearance, rumors began to spread through naval circles. Rumors of a convoy that didn't exist. Some claimed Vigilant had been tracking a group of German vessels operating outside known U-boat lanes. But German records, post-war, show no such movements in the area. Others whispered something far stranger, that Vigilant had been sent to observe an Allied convoy, one that officially never left port. What kind of fleet would be so secret that it wasn't even acknowledged in internal dispatches? A few daring researchers piecing together declassified fragments suggest the existence of ghost fleets, temporary deployments testing unapproved technologies or prototypes. One intelligence cable, marked top secret and dated April the 21st, 1943, refers cryptically to non-standard assets in Zone 7B, maintain distance. The origin of that message, unknown, the recipient, redacted. Was Vigilant a watchdog or a scapegoat? To this day, no explanation has ever been given for the military silence around that region. It is as if an entire section of wartime history has been quietly erased. The convoy, if it ever existed, left no records, only questions. In the same sector where HMS Vigilant disappeared, another operation was quietly underway. Its name was Mirror C, an innocuous code name that remained buried under layers of military secrecy until its partial declassification in 2004. The documents that survived were fragmented, redacted, and full of euphemisms. But one thing was clear: Mirror C wasn't a routine patrol. Officially, the mission was described as a sonar field assessment, meant to test new methods of detecting enemy vessels using acoustic triangulation. But alternative reports suggest something far stranger. Unconfirmed whistleblower testimonies refer to deliberate sonar distortion experiments, projects designed to bend sound, interfere with enemy detection, and even mask entire vessels from sonar reflection altogether. Other sources, including a former intelligence technician turned anonymous source in the 1980s, went further. He claimed Mirror C was testing not just equipment, but human endurance. Some of the participating crews, he said, were exposed to high-frequency pulses intended to disorient or manipulate sensory perception. One passage in a redacted memo simply reads, "Crew responses unpredictable. Cognitive lag inconsistent across test groups. Halt trials until further notice." If Mirror C was underway at the same time as Vigilant's final voyage, the implications are staggering. Could the submarine have crossed into an experimental zone? Or worse, been part of the experiment without the crew even knowing? Whatever Mirror C truly was, it wasn't just science, it was risk. And someone decided the ocean was the best place to hide it. The North Atlantic was a known killer of ships: storms, mechanical failure, enemy attacks. But in 1943, something different began to emerge among the submarine crews who returned from patrols near Zone 7B. They came back wrong. Several crew members from HMS Tantalus, which had passed through the northern fringe of the area weeks before Vigilant's disappearance, reported experiencing severe disorientation. Some couldn't account for stretches of time during the voyage. Others described vivid hallucinations, phantom voices over the intercom, impossible echoes in the ballast tanks, crew members glimpsed in corridors who had never been assigned to the vessel. In one documented case, an engineer on HMS Vigilant violently insisted they had surfaced near a floating object made of glass, something he claimed distorted the stars above it. He was discharged on psychiatric grounds. No investigation followed. Navigation logs from these missions show repeated course deviations, compasses swinging off true north, sonar failing to reflect terrain that clearly existed. Instruments would briefly shut down, then restart without fault. Officers blamed electromagnetic interference or equipment fatigue, but the frequency of the incidents tells another story. Could Vigilant have encountered a full-strength version of the anomalies others only brushed past? Some survivors later said in private that they felt as though something had been watching their boats from below. Not a U-boat, not a ship, just presence. Unseen, but overwhelming. Whatever it was, it didn't want to be found. In the early hours of April 22nd, 1943, the same day HMS Vigilant sent its final transmission, a British escort ship, HMS Orpheus, logged a strange anomaly. The crew had detected a sharp magnetic spike on their instruments, lasting only 40 seconds, near the coordinates later associated with Vigilant's disappearance. The data was logged, but then nothing. The entry was never followed up. In fact, it was quietly removed from the ship's official patrol report, only to resurface decades later in a misfiled batch of naval archives. The spike couldn't be attributed to enemy mines, underwater cables, or solar interference. It was a clean surge, like something massive, metallic, and electrically charged had passed through the region. The ship's onboard geologist noted, "The reading doesn't match natural field behavior. Either the compass was wrong or something artificial was generating the distortion." And yet, the Admiralty issued no inquiry. Why ignore data that could explain a major wartime loss? Some researchers now believe the anomaly wasn't just related to Vigilant, it was Vigilant, or rather what was left of it. If they were testing something, did they lose control? In underwater warfare, sonar is a lifeline. A submarine sends out a ping, and if it hits something solid, it returns with a telltale echo, revealing shape, distance, and location. It's how subs navigate, hunt, and survive. But when Allied listening stations tried to locate HMS Vigilant after it missed its scheduled check-in, they received something altogether more unsettling. One of the last sonar pulses directed toward Vigilant's estimated coordinates returned nothing. Not a garbled signal, not a distorted echo, just emptiness. It was as though the ping had vanished into a void, not absorbed, not refracted, but swallowed by something that left no trace. Normally, even deep trenches and mudflats give back faint echoes. Yet multiple sonar sweeps over the next 72 hours produced the same result. Technicians recalibrated the equipment suspecting malfunction, but other signals worked fine. Only this region refused to speak back. One officer, in a later oral history interview, called it an acoustic dead zone, unlike anything he'd encountered in 20 years of naval service. The ocean has long been considered a place of secrets, but this was different. This wasn't silence by nature, it was silence by force, as if something had turned the sea into a shield, cloaking what lay beneath, or erasing it entirely. Nearly 50 years after the Vigilant's disappearance, a deep-sea exploration team searching for Cold War debris off the Norwegian shelf stumbled across something unexpected. At a depth of over 2,800 meters, the team's side-scan sonar picked up a long, narrow object half buried in the silt, vaguely submarine-shaped, but off. Excited, they deployed remote cameras. What they recorded remains the source of fierce debate to this day. The hull appeared metallic, but bore no markings. No serial number, no hatches, no flag. The shape was sleeker than anything from the World War II era, rounded, seamless, almost organic in design. Its length was roughly consistent with that of a fleet submarine, but the angles were too smooth, the joints too perfect. The recovery team, a mix of NATO contractors and civilian researchers, claimed they had discovered an unknown wreck, but after submitting initial data to British Naval Archives, the team's access was revoked. A naval inquiry was launched. Within weeks, the entire operation was shut down. Some members received official gag orders under national security statutes. One diver later broke silence speaking anonymously in a 2003 interview. Whatever it was, he said, it wasn't built in 1943 and it wasn't meant to be found. To this day, no government has claimed the object, and it remains on no official map, a phantom structure lying in a trench too deep for casual divers, too disturbing for open acknowledgement. Years later, fragments from the site, smuggled out by an unknown technician, were analyzed by independent metallurgists in Germany and Canada. The results defied explanation. The metal samples were remarkably resistant to corrosion, far beyond what any 1940s era steel could achieve. In fact, some researchers noted that oxidation levels were consistent with a decade-old object, not one submerged for half a century. Microscopic analysis revealed unusual alloy patterns, with traces of titanium, boron, and a molecular bonding structure unfamiliar to both wartime and Cold War engineering. No welding seams, no riveting, said one engineer. It looks like it was grown, not built. Theories flew fast. A lost Nazi prototype? An advanced Allied experiment abandoned and buried? But even the most ambitious wartime projects left behind design plans, materials lists, or rumors among insiders. This had nothing. And the most puzzling part, when cross-referenced with archival blueprints, the object's rough dimensions loosely matched those of HMS Vigilant, but everything else, shape, density, construction, made that impossible. Historians are baffled by the engineering. It shouldn't exist, and yet it does, buried in silence, wrapped in mystery and waiting beneath the sea. In 2011, a batch of wartime German naval logs was released by the Bundesarchiv after decades of internal review. Among them, buried in a footnote within U-boat communications, was a peculiar entry dated April the 22nd, 1943, the day HMS Vigilant vanished. Translated loosely, it read, intercepted a foreign submarine signal not registered in Allied fleet records, brief sonar contact made, vessel type unknown, no pursuit, ordered silence. The entry had never been flagged before, but its implications were staggering. First, the coordinates placed the encounter within the disputed Zone 7B, where the Vigilant was believed to be operating. Second, the German U-boat commander, a notoriously precise officer, made clear that the vessel in question did not match any known Allied design. This wasn't a case of mistaken identity. The commander even logged that the unknown sub did not respond to standard identification hails and that the acoustic signature oscillated unnaturally. It's as if the U-boat had brushed against something alien, not just in technology but in behavior. Why did the German command order radio silence after the encounter? And why was no action taken to pursue or record further? The entry ends with one final line: maintain course. Engage only if approached again. Assume observer status. It was a directive rarely issued, one reserved for craft deemed either experimental or unknown. Allied Naval Command classified HMS Vigilant's last known hours as a period of total radio silence. But decades later, digital restorations of wartime signal records began to uncover something far stranger. Between 300 and 600 hours on April the 22nd, 3 Allied listening stations, 2 in Greenland, 1 in Scotland, recorded sharp, irregular bursts of radio interference. The bursts were short-lived, unscheduled, and carried no clear message. Initially dismissed as atmospheric noise, further analysis revealed a pattern. The intervals were too precise, the frequencies too narrow. Some theorists believe these were distress signals, but others, including radio historian Dr. Eli Sanders, argue that the frequency shape doesn't match standard Allied codes. These signals have no modulation signature known to any military system of the time. He wrote in a suppressed 1998 white paper, "They exhibit harmonic overtones that suggest artificial but non-human origin. It's like hearing speech that was never meant for ears." Even more troubling was the fact that the interference corresponded almost exactly to the window during which Vigilant was expected to report in. What if the sub didn't fall silent but was jammed? Or worse, what if something else was transmitting through it? Multiple experts have now suggested that the bursts weren't just signals, they were responses. To this day, no one can agree who or what might have been speaking. Among the last data packets linked to HMS Vigilant is a single coded message, time-stamped mere minutes after its final known position report. Unlike its earlier transmissions, which followed standard Navy encryption, this message was different. It used a cipher never seen before or since. Attempts to decode it have spanned decades, involving cryptographers from Britain, the US, and even academic AI programs. Every effort has failed. The cipher doesn't align with Enigma, Purple, or any wartime crypto system. The message structure itself defies known linguistic patterns. Too complex to be gibberish, too chaotic to be machine noise. One analyst described it as linguistic static wearing the mask of order. Another more candidly asked, "Are we even sure this message was meant for us?" There's a chilling possibility that the final message wasn't encrypted. It was in a language we simply don't understand. No context, no key, just strings of unintelligible characters, followed by a brief pause in the signal, and then absolute silence. What if that last message wasn't from our world at all? And more disturbingly, what if it wasn't sent to us, but through us? For decades, the British Royal Navy maintained a straightforward explanation for HMS Vigilant's disappearance: mechanical failure, a routine patrol, a hidden systems malfunction, a dive gone wrong. Tragic, but unremarkable. Submarines, after all, are unforgiving machines in unforgiving waters. But even a cursory technical review shatters this version of events. The Vigilant had undergone a full systems overhaul just weeks before her final voyage. She was fitted with upgraded ballast systems, reinforced hull plating, and redundant power circuits, including an experimental failsafe designed to surface the vessel automatically in the event of power loss. The probability of a total failure across all systems was mathematically negligible. More troubling still, no acoustic signatures of implosion were recorded. Allied hydrophones scattered across the North Atlantic routinely picked up submarine breakups. The Vigilant's demise, if sudden and catastrophic, should have triggered a seismic ripple, yet none was detected. Even the mechanical failure hypothesis can't explain the anomalies. The phantom sonar pings, the scrambled signals, the missing wreckage. There's no record of storm activity, enemy subs, or minefields in the area. The sea was calm. The route was officially safe. So why cling to a theory that doesn't hold up? Why force a conventional answer onto an unconventional disappearance? Unless, perhaps, the truth doesn't fail scrutiny. It demands suppression. In 1984, nearly 4 decades after the disappearance, a private salvage company known for Cold War recovery efforts obtained a quiet permit to scan parts of the North Atlantic. Though the operation was publicly listed as a search for downed aircraft, rumors swirled that it was targeting something far older and far deeper. By late summer, one diver, identified only as MK in leaked testimony, claimed they had located wreckage that matched no known naval design. The structure was partially embedded in the seabed, seamless and radiating residual heat as if recently disturbed. Photographs were taken. Samples were reportedly recovered. Then MK vanished. Days after giving an anonymous interview to a local reporter in Aberdeen, MK went hiking alone in the Cairngorms. He never returned. A search party found only his backpack, contents undisturbed, no signs of struggle, no obvious cause for alarm. The official ruling? Accidental death. But no body was ever recovered. The reporter, too, went silent. Her article was pulled from the archive. Her notes were seized under national security orders. Other members of the dive team received legal threats, phone surveillance, and, in at least one case, visits from defense consultants warning of breach of contract consequences. Their operation was abruptly terminated, funding revoked, files sealed. Whatever was found down there, someone higher up decided it could not be known, not to the public, not to history, and certainly not to the family still waiting for answers. In quiet retirement homes, late-night bars, and confidential interviews, a few former intelligence officers have begun to talk, not publicly, not boldly, but with a quiet conviction born of guilt and age. One, now in his 80s, admitted in a taped interview, "There were files we weren't allowed to read, even with clearance. Whole cabinets locked down and marked with red ink. I saw the word vigilant once, that was enough." Another, formerly of MY6, said simply, "There are stories we don't put in the history books because the public wouldn't believe them. Or worse, they'd believe them too much." What little they've said only confirms what the evidence already suggests. The disappearance of HMS Vigilant wasn't just a wartime tragedy, it was a boundary, the point where official history ends and something else begins. Why suppress the truth unless it's dangerous? Why erase a vessel from memory? Unless what it found was never meant to surface. One of the more grounded theories surrounding HMS Vigilant's disappearance points to deception, the possibility that the submarine was lured into a carefully laid German ambush. During World War II, both Allied and Axis forces employed radio spoofing, broadcasting false signals to mislead enemy ships. Could Vigilant have followed a fake Allied directive, unknowingly sailing into a deadly U-boat trap? Supporters of this theory argue that the rerouting of the sub toward Zone 7B makes strategic sense only if it had received new orders. If those orders came from an enemy masquerading as high command, the submarine may have gone dark for entirely conventional, albeit tragic, reasons. But this explanation quickly unravels under scrutiny. Post-war access to German naval records, particularly those of the Kriegsmarine's Communications Division, shows no evidence of such an operation. Not a single log confirms any coordinated trap in the region during April 1943. U-boat deployments at the time were focused farther south, near convoy-heavy lanes. Additionally, there are no wreckage patterns, no acoustic reports of torpedo detonations, and no survivor testimonies, all common with submarine losses due to attack. If the Germans had pulled off a successful ambush against one of Britain's most advanced subs, they would have bragged about it. Instead, their records suggest confusion and an encounter with something they couldn't identify, which leaves us with a chilling alternative. Perhaps it wasn't a trap, because there was no enemy, at least not one the Germans recognized. Dig deeper, and the story takes a more disturbing turn into the shadows of wartime science. Some researchers believe HMS Vigilant was not a victim, but a participant, that it was part of a secret joint U.S.-British experiment codenamed Project SIREN, an initiative rumored to test the feasibility of mass psychological manipulation using sound electromagnetic fields and altered sonar frequencies. Declassified fragments suggest both governments were interested in weaponizing perception. If you could disorient a crew, make them see or hear things that weren't real, you could disable a vessel without firing a shot It was the earliest seed of what would become Cold War-era mind control programs. According to this theory, Vigilant was the test bed. Some say a modified acoustic device was installed on board, one capable of emitting low-frequency pulses intended to trigger confusion, fear, or even hallucinations. Other versions claim the sub was part of a containment trial, monitoring a device located on the sea floor, something experimental, unstable, and not of Allied origin. But something went wrong. Crew behavior became erratic. Signals stopped making sense. Internal communications faltered, and then nothing. The experiment may have succeeded in one sense. It proved that perception could be altered, but it may also have pushed the Vigilant and everything on board beyond recovery. The files, of course, are gone, burned, redacted, or buried. But those who speak of Project SIREN agree on one thing: it was never repeated, because what happened to the Vigilant was never supposed to happen at all. Beyond even the shadows of military secrecy lies a theory too strange for official record and too persistent to ignore. Some believe HMS Vigilant didn't sink. It vanished, not in the conventional sense, but in time or space. Fringe theorists point to the infamous Philadelphia experiment, a supposed 1943 U.S. Navy trial in which a ship allegedly became invisible or even teleported. While mainstream historians dismiss this as myth, notes attributed to Einstein's naval advisory work include strange equations referencing localized temporal folds in fluid dynamic environments. In one obscure memo from British archives, marked not for operational use, a cryptic phrase appears: "Vessel past threshold event. Data inconclusive. Recommend no further testing." Threshold of what? Some suggest Zone 7B holds an unstable anomaly, a rift of some kind, triggered or detected by the experimental tech aboard Vigilant. A doorway, not to another location, but to another state. A loop in time, a shift in dimension, a crossing that went only one way. Could the Philadelphia experiment have a forgotten twin? And if so, where did it send them? In the early 2010s, advances in deep-sea scanning technology opened new possibilities for exploring long-forgotten wreck sites, and for some, revisiting the unexplained. A joint venture between European oceanographic institutes and private contractors launched an expedition to the northern Atlantic Trench System, not far from where HMS Vigilant was believed to have disappeared. Publicly, the mission was labeled a geological survey, but insiders later confirmed the true objective: to investigate recurring sonar anomalies detected in that sector, anomalies that bore a curious resemblance to a long-lost submarine profile. Over 3 separate dives, autonomous underwater vehicles, AUVs, reported electromagnetic interference, magnetic field distortions, and thermal spikes rising inexplicably from the seabed. In one recorded dive, the AUV's onboard systems froze for 7 seconds, then restarted, as if rebooted remotely. By the end of the second month, the mission's focus narrowed to a trench previously unmapped, a sheer crevasse over 2,600 meters deep, known among the team as the Step. Then abruptly, the mission was called off. Funding was reallocated. Equipment was recalled. A final report, once promised to be made public, was sealed under non-disclosure agreements. When one technician asked why, he was told bluntly, "It's not about what we found. It's about who doesn't want us to find it again." Among the mission's support crew was a marine biologist named Dr. Isla Carrick, contracted to document seafloor anomalies and potential unknown species near the trench. Carrick was no stranger to deep-sea mysteries, But what she witnessed during one dive reportedly changed her career and perhaps her life. On the fifth expedition, using a tethered drone camera, Carrick captured several minutes of video footage showing a partially buried structure. It was smooth, metallic, and curved, unlike any rock or wreck she'd ever encountered. Her notes describe a surface too precise to be natural, with edges that appeared melted or fused, not corroded. Later, she claimed that the object emitted a low-frequency hum, detectable only through hydrophones, a sound pattern she described as almost like breathing. Excited, Carrick compiled stills and drone footage, preparing to release her findings through her university's research journal. But 2 days before the scheduled publication, her laptop was stolen from her locked office. The building's security cameras had been disabled during the exact 40-minute window the thief would have needed. She reported the theft. The case went nowhere. Soon after, Carrick withdrew from public life. She left her university post, deleted her research blog, and declined all interviews. To this day, none of her footage has resurfaced, and though unofficial scans of the trench area still circulate in niche communities, no mainstream institution has ever acknowledged the object again. Whatever she found down there, someone wanted it to disappear, just like Vigilant. In 2022, under overcast skies on a quiet naval base in the Scottish Highlands, a small ceremony was held. A new memorial plaque was installed, sleek, gray, and unassuming. It bore the Royal Navy emblem and the date April the 22nd, 1943, and a single inscription, in honor of those lost in duty in places unspoken. No mention of HMS Vigilant, no names, no list of the 47 souls believed to be aboard. Just silence. Locals who attended the service described it as strangely formal, with several high-ranking officials present, but no press, no speeches, no family invitations. Photographs of the plaque were discouraged. Even now, it is not listed on the Ministry of Defense's official registry of wartime memorials. Why create a tribute to something the government won't acknowledge? Some believe it was a quiet concession, an unspoken admission that something happened, something worth remembering, even if the details remain buried. Others see it differently, a subtle but deliberate attempt to rewrite memory, to reduce a vanished submarine to a poetic whisper on a stone no one is supposed to find. Who is trying to erase this submarine from history? And more importantly, why? More than 8 decades have passed since HMS Vigilant slipped beneath the Atlantic waves, and still no closure has come for the families left behind. No bodies, no confirmed wreckage, no official explanation that holds water. For the children and grandchildren of the lost crew, the pain remains, a wound made deeper by silence. Some families have spent their entire lives chasing answers. Margaret Ellis, daughter of the sub's communications officer, kept a journal cataloging every mention, every rumor, every declassified fragment about the disappearance. She passed it on to her son before her death. It was never about finding someone to blame, he said. It was about knowing what happened and why no one will tell us. Others live with the quiet ache of incompletion. One crewman's brother, now in his 90s, still leaves flowers at the Naval Memorial in Portsmouth each April, despite Vigilant's name being absent from the roll. The absence of wreckage, of remains, of any physical trace feels deliberate, as if the sea was not the only one trying to erase the submarine's story. And yet, despite the stonewalling and contradictions, the families have never stopped asking, not because they expect an answer, but because they deserve one. In 1993, on the 50th anniversary of HMS Vigilant's disappearance, The Ministry of Defense was quietly pressured by several MPs and civilian historians to release a formal statement. What followed was brief, vague, and unsettling. The loss of HMS Vigilant remains an unresolved matter. Despite extensive analysis of archival records and post-war intelligence, we cannot fully account for what occurred on April the 22nd, 1943. The file remains open. That last sentence, "the file remains open," was perhaps the most telling. Normally, naval loss cases are closed with finality. Even when no bodies are found, a combination of wreckage analysis and wartime context allows the military to issue a definitive cause. Mechanical failure, enemy action, navigational error, but not vigilant. The wording of the statement was carefully constructed. It didn't deny strange circumstances. It didn't confirm them either. It left a void, a blank space where facts should be. A subtle message. There is more, but we will not say. In a 2007 FOIA request, a researcher asked for clarification on whether experimental technologies or intelligence operations may have played a role. The response was swift and sterile. No further records are available for public review at this time, which leads to the question, what would be so dangerous, so destabilizing, that 8 decades later, it's still off limits? The ocean is a vast keeper of secrets. It buries steel and memory in equal measure, but it's not the only force skilled at hiding the truth. Governments, too, know how to submerge uncomfortable realities under paperwork, red tape, denials dressed as forgetfulness. The story of HMS Vigilant is not simply about a lost submarine. It's about a collision between human curiosity and the edges of what we're allowed to know, between a routine patrol and something non-routine that rewrote the lives of 47 men and rewired the history surrounding them. Maybe the Vigilant encountered something that couldn't be explained. Maybe it wandered too close to a phenomenon, a structure, or an experiment that was meant to be unreachable. Maybe it wasn't an accident. Maybe it wasn't even a mission. Maybe it was a warning. The data trails end in silence. The logs contradict themselves. And the sea, when asked, gives no reply. But one whisper lingers even now. What if the real mystery is what it found down there? The Vigilant vanished, but the questions it left behind, they've surfaced, and they're not going back under.